you the quantum mechanics?
Yes, we are the Quantum Mechanics, the paranormal podcast for the believers, the doubters, and everybody in between.
We are indeed. Now, it is forecast that during this recording, we're going to get thunder and lightning. So that will add a certain intensity, I think, to proceedings if it happens.
I think I'll be 8% better.
Yeah, 8% wetter.
Yes, better and wetter.
So, Ben, for this episode, I think it's worth going back to the days just before we started this podcast, or were working out what we wanted to do and what we were going to call ourselves, and why we chose the quantum mechanics. I know we've talked about it before, but it is relevant to today.
Those many years ago.
Many years ago.
I was a mere boy.
Yeah, man and boy. Now, at the time, we really chose the name because we were both interested in how weird and strange quantum mechanics and the science around it was.
Yeah.
And it seemed as strange, as bizarre as some of the events and stories of the paranormal, which people were more sceptical of than, let's say, quantum mechanics.
Absolutely.
Now, at that point, I think it's fair to say we weren't trying to make some big connection between the paranormal and the quantum world. But as this podcast has progressed, we've kind of ended up doing that a little bit, haven't we?
Yeah, we have.
Another recurring feature for us has been the relative lack of exploration of paranormal topics in terms of scientific research and academic writing. That's why we've delved into a lot of academic papers when we find them, right? Now, we have identified a number of reasons for that. I mean, it's hard to create experiments that provide conclusive empirical evidence of the paranormal. Pretty much impossible most of the time.
Yep.
Tricky to get funding for this kind of research. You know, the Stanford back in the day did all right, but, you know, these days it's not really on top of people's priorities in terms of funding. And then there's that reputational angle. I mean, we heard from an episode I did where we involved Rupert Sheldrake, and others have talked about it as well, how scientists and academics who are interested in the paranormal, they fear for their reputation if they write about it or share their views. Today, I wanted to look at a couple of recent theories about the paranormal where the authors, I guess, put their heads above the parapet a little bit in terms of the paranormal and research, or at least academic work or writing. I've got a couple of articles that I'm going to refer to, and they are making connections with the quantum world and the paranormal world, which I thought was interesting. But before we get into a couple of those papers, I want to start with an article that I found in Science News Explores, really because I guess it's stereotypical of the way that people often write about paranormal topics and science, probably more from a sceptical point of view. Now, the article is by Catherine Hullick, and it's titled The Science of Ghosts. And as you hear, it touches on, the more sceptical scientific explanations that why we often hear about paranormal encounters and activity. They write, "A shadowy figure rushed through the door. It had a skeletal body surrounded by a white blurry aura," recalls Dom. "The figure hovered and it didn't seem to have a face. Dom, who prefers to use his first name, had been fast asleep. Just 15 at the time, he panicked and closed his eyes. I only saw it for a second," he recalls. Now he's a young adult who lives in the United Kingdom, but he still remembers the experience vividly. Was the figure a ghost? In the mythology of the United States and many other Western cultures, a ghost or spirit is a dead person who interacts with the living world. In stories, a ghost may whisper or groan, cause things to move or fall, mess with electronics, even appear as a shadowy, blurry or see-through figure. Ghost stories are a lot of fun, the author says, especially on Halloween. But some people believe that ghosts are real. Chapman University runs a yearly survey that asks people in the United States about their belief in the paranormal. In 2018, 58% of those polled agreed with the statement, "Places can be haunted by spirits." I think we've gone over various statistics. I'm always, I don't know if the word's impressed, taken by how popular the belief in the paranormal is compared to how much attention it receives in some ways.
Yeah.
Almost 1 in 5 people from the United States said in another survey conducted by Pew Research Center in Washington, D.C., that they've seen or been in the presence of a ghost. On ghost hunting TV shows, people use scientific equipment to attempt to record or measure spirit activity. There are numerous creepy photos and videos that make it seem like ghosts exist. However, none of these offer good evidence of ghosts, the author says. Some are hoaxes created to fool people. The rest only prove that equipment sometimes can capture noise, images, or other signals that people don't expect. Ghosts are the least likely of many possible explanations. Not only are ghosts supposed to be able to do things that science says are impossible, such as turn invisible or pass through walls, but also scientists using reliable research methods have found zero evidence that ghosts exist. What science has discovered, though, are a lot of reasons why people feel that they have had ghostly encounters. What their data shows is that they can't always trust your eyes, your ears, or your brain. So she goes back to Dom's story. She says Dom began having unusual experiences when he was 8 or 9. He would wake up unable to move. He researched what was happening to him and he learned that science had a name for it: sleep paralysis. This condition leaves someone feeling awake but paralysed. We've covered this a number of times. Can't move or speak or breathe deeply.
The old hag syndrome.
Yes, actually this Dom experiences that, actually. It comes on to that. There's something about this article, just the way it's written. I had to read it a couple of times. It's just like targeted for kids, but I don't think it is. It's just the language of it. They say people may also see, hear or feel figures or creatures that aren't really there. This is called a hallucination. Sometimes Dom hallucinated that creatures were walking or sitting on him. That's very old hag.
Oh, yeah, very much so, yeah.
Other times he heard screaming. He only saw something that one time as a teenager. Sleep paralysis happens when the brain messes up the process of falling asleep or waking. Usually you only start dreaming after you're fully asleep, and you stop dreaming before you wake up. Sleep paralysis is like dreaming with your eyes open, explained Baland Jalal, a neuroscientist. He studies sleep paralysis at the University of Cambridge in England. He says this is why it happens. Our most vivid, lifelike dreams happen during a certain stage of sleep. It's called rapid eye movement, or REM. In this stage, your eyes dart around under their closed lids. Though your eyes move, the rest of the body can't. It's paralysed. Most likely this to prevent you from acting out your dreams. Your brain usually turns this paralysis off before you wake up, but in sleep paralysis, you wake up while it's still happening. And also there's that side of your subconscious brain is engaged, so why you might be liable to hallucinate. So I think from this, kind of saying, look, Dom's been suffering from sleep paralysis rather than seeing ghosts. Now the article moves on to pareidolia. Always pareidolia or pareidolia?
I always say pareidolia.
Okay, I'm going to do that then. The article moves on to pareidolia. You don't have to experience sleep paralysis to sense things that aren't there, writes Hullock. Have you ever felt your phone buzz, then checked to find there was no message? Have you heard someone calling your name when no one was there?
Oh, yeah. Both of those all the time.
Have you ever seen a face or figure in a dark shadow? So these misperceptions also count as hallucinations, says David Smailers, who's a psychologist in England at Northumbria University in Newcastle upon Tyne. He thinks that just about everyone has such experiences. Most of us just ignore them, but some may turn them into ghosts as an explanation. We're used to our senses giving us accurate information about the world. So when experiencing a hallucination, our first instinct is usually to believe it. If you see or feel a presence of a loved one who died and trust your perceptions, then it has to be a ghost, said Smilers. That's easier to believe than the idea that your brain is lying to you. The brain has a tough job. Information from the world bombards you as a mixed up jumble of signals. The eye takes in colour, the ears take in sound, the skin senses pressure, and the brain works to make sense of this mess. This is called bottom-up processing. Bottom-up processing. And the brain is very good at it. It's so good that it sometimes finds meaning in meaningless things. This is known as pareidolia. I'm going to say it different every time now. I've asked.
There's lots of names for the same thing. They all sound very similar.
Oh, they've done a pronunciation spell. Pareidolia. Pareidolia.
Pareidolia.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You experience it whenever you stare at clouds and see rabbits, ships, or faces, or gaze at the moon and see a face. I think we all know that process.
Although I've never seen a face in the moon.
I have seen faces in the moon.
Have you?
Yeah, yeah. Not that, I wasn't going, oh my God, there's a face in the moon, but you know what I mean?
No, but that man in the moon, people have said to me, oh, look, the man in the moon's really bright tonight. Like, I just can't.
I know, I've seen that. It's like we're back to those magic eye pictures.
Yeah, yeah.
The brain also does top-down processing. It adds information to your perception of the world. Most of the time, there is way too much stuff coming into the senses. Paying attention to all of it would overwhelm you, so your brain picks out the most important parts, fills in the rest. The vast majority of perception is the brain filling in the gaps, explains Smiles. What you see right now isn't what's actually out there in the world. It's a picture your brain has painted for you based on the signals captured by your eyes. The same goes for your other senses. Most of the time this picture is accurate, but sometimes the brain adds things that aren't there. Yeah, it's a good example. He says, for example, when you mishear the lyrics in a song, your brain filled in a meaning that wasn't there, and it will likely continue to be misheard, even though you know what words are the right ones.
Wrapped up like a douche, another meaning in the night. Yeah.
Or another. I always have it with David Bowie's "Life on Mars," because there's a bit in it where I always thought it was "and lemons on sale again," and it's Lennon's on sale again.
Right. But both make sense.
Yeah, and I can't not hear it now.
Right. Yeah. Lord of the Dance to Tea.
They make the analogy that this is similar to what happens when so-called ghost hunters capture sound that they say are ghost speaking. So EVPs. They say the recording is probably just random noise. If you listen to it without knowing what it was supposedly said, you probably won't hear the words. But when you know what the words are supposed to be, you might now find that you can discern them easily. We've had quite a few examples of not EVPs that we've captured, but other people saying this is an EVP of that. And I know there's times you've played them to me without saying what it's supposed to say, and I go, I can't hear anything. And then you're saying, it's saying turn left, and you go, turn left. Oh, yes, it's saying turn left.
Yeah. You sounded like that whale there.
Really?
Harrow!
It's a bit also like that phenomenon we've done about backmasking, where songs are played backwards. You can make out all satanic lyrics and various bits in there that aren't really there.
I would take issue with all the EVPs there, because there are some EVPs that are so clear, that they almost sound fake. We did that record. I forget his name now, but the one which was addressing the person in the room, Marjorie.
Oh yeah.
So clear. And we've also had other ones where we had somebody who was communicating. They were a deceased dog trainer, and they were communicating to a dog in the room, saying "quiet now" to a dog.
Right.
But you're right. I think the time when it's most apparent is when you're using a spirit box and it's flicking between radio stations. I think that is very hard to discern, and it's probably open to human ear bias. Yeah.
Right. Well, it says your brain may also add faces to images of random noise. Research has shown that patients who experience visual hallucinations are more likely than other people to experience pareidolia. They see faces in random shapes, for instance. This is interesting. In one 2018 study, Smiley's team tested whether this might also be true. This shows the bias of this author for healthy people. They recruited 82 volunteers. First, the researchers asked them a series of questions about how often these volunteers had hallucination-like experiences. For example, do you ever see things other people cannot? Do you ever think that everyday things look abnormal to you? Next, the participants looked at 60 images of black and white noise. For a brief moment, another image would flash in the centre of the noise. 12 of these images were faces that were easy to see. Another 24 were hard to see faces. And 24 images showed no faces at all, just noise. The volunteers had to report whether a face was present or absent in each flash. In a separate test, researchers showed the same volunteers a series of 36 images. 2/3 of them contained a face pareidolia, the remaining 12 did not. Participants who had initially reported more hallucination-like experiences were also more likely to report faces in the flashes of random noise. They were also better at identifying those images that contained face pareidolia, which, again, it seems to be phrased in this article as that's something bad. But, hold on, if there are pareidolia faces in there because you've put them in there and they've spotted them, surely that's an enhanced perception. But anyway.
Yeah. And the reason that we have it is because we're trying to make sense. Like, the most recognisable thing is another human face, so of course we're just very good at pattern matching on that. I mean, I would have assumed that sort of, one would take that as red.
Yeah. Well, in the next few years, Smoles plans to study situations in which people might be more likely to see faces in randomness. When people sense ghosts, he points out, they're often alone in the dark and scared. If it's dark, your brain can't get much visual information from the world. It has to create more of your reality for you. In this type of situation, he says, the brain may be more likely to impose its own creation onto reality, which I think you've got to agree with that as a point. Now, the next bit in the article, again, we talk about kind of coincidence, really grabbed my attention. I'm not sure if it was on the main episode or on Ben and Peter's Extra Scoop. You were talking about that video where you watch it and most people don't spot
the gorilla,
giant gorilla walking across the screen.
Yeah. People are performing acrobatic acts and the gorilla walks in the background,
Well, the article goes into the psychology behind that. It's really fascinating. It's a video that, just to explain it, has a lot of people walking and moving across the screen. And most people end up missing or not seeing someone in a gorilla suit walk across the screen, right? That's the basic premise of it. Now, it's really interesting how this phenomenon works. So at the start of the video, you are asked to count as many people as you can who are wearing white T-shirts. So your brain is so focused on that task that you filter out, ignore, or just don't see the person in the gorilla suit. There's a name for this. It's known as inattentional blindness.
Okay,
You're in a state of what's called absorption. You're so focused on the task of spotting people in the white T-shirt. Now, Christopher French, a psychologist at Goldsmith University of London, says, memory does not work like a video camera. You only remember things you're paying attention to. Some people are more likely to become absorbed than others. And these people also report higher levels of paranormal beliefs, he says, including belief in ghosts. So if you watch that video, if you definitely didn't see the gorilla, you're more likely to believe in the paranormal, weirdly.
Yeah, I didn't see the gorilla, but
I didn't see it either the first time I saw it.
Okay.
Now, how could these things be related? Some strange experience that people blame on ghosts involve unexplained sound or movement. So they use the example, a window may seem to open all by itself. But what if someone opened it and you just didn't notice because you were so absorbed in something else? That's a lot more likely than a ghost, French says. In one 2014 study, French and his colleagues found that people with higher levels of paranormal beliefs and higher tendencies to get absorbed are also more likely to experience inattentional blindness. They also tend to have more limited working memory. That's how much more information you can hold in your memory at once. So if you have trouble keeping a lot of information in your memory or paying attention to more than one thing at once, then you risk missing sensory clues from the environment around you, and you might blame these misconceptions as the result of ghosts or something paranormal.
Yes, I suppose so, yes. But it's very contextualised to what we're talking about, isn't it? Because the way that they are framing this is that you will misinterpret something that you see outside of your main area of conscious focus. Whereas the only time I've ever seen anything that could be construed as a ghost, it was my main centre of focus. And I so didn't believe my eyes, I had to check it and recheck it. Now, I don't think that is down to pareidolia or in any sense my attention being defocused. This seems like... So Chris French, he appears in a lot of these things. He's an arch skeptic. And even if a ghost was sitting on his knee singing, "I'm a phantom and you know it," he would still say there is no such thing as ghosts.
Yeah.
So as much as I respect Mr. French for his abilities and his point of view, he is going to go to great lengths to say that there is no such thing as ghosts.
Well, I think it's interesting you say that, because the article, and it wasn't just French, there was everyone in it, I guess. It then went on to suggest that in some ways, people who are interested in the paranormal are less intelligent or not good critical thinkers.
Yeah, there we go, you see. And that is why we have a problem investigating this stuff in with an open mind and a broad mind.
Yeah.
Because he is completely missing the point that the majority of the great thinkers of the past, not stupid men at all, stupid women... Stupid people is the word I'm groping for. They had an open mind to this. And I think to not have an open mind to it is to be more ignorant than having an open mind to it.
Well, even in terms of the whole way the piece was written, almost saying people who believe in the paranormal are less likely to do this than normal people. Do you know what I mean? It's like, well, you've got this bias is coming in right from the start.
Yeah, I'm not having that.
Well, and I think, weirdly, the downside of that...
It's the first academic paper that's made me angry.
Well, it made me... It wasn't an academic paper, it was more a journalistic article, but it made me so angry at this point, I stopped reading it. I just thought, I'm not reading any more of this. So my inattentional blindness paradoxically kicked in. I was like, I'm going to ignore this article. But it does illustrate what's difficult when you take such extreme views on this debate.
Yes, it does.
Because I just wanted to disengage and go, well, I'm not going to read the rest of it then, because you're just pissing me off now.
But I think this reinforces the reason why it is hard to have a discussion about this subject where people come up with explanations that aren't crazy. So I would challenge... So last week I referenced a Harvard professor who had written a paper about transdimensional beings. And you see, he wasn't advocating that they're real. He was advocating that there is a real possibility that they're real. Chris French there is closing down any possibility that ghosts are real. And it's the big giveaway on the bias was the beginning of the article when he discusses the fact that it is considered in Western civilization that the ghost is a dead person come back to interact with the living.
Yeah.
That is just yes, that is a commonly held belief, but that doesn't mean that people... don't interrogate that belief and go, oh, I wonder if it could be something different. Every time we come across a ghost story, we enjoy the story, but we also say, this could be something completely different. It could be a tulpa, it could be a dark spirit, it could be an entity that we don't understand, it could be a transdimensional being. To close that conversation down is ignorant.
Just for clarity, it wasn't French who said that at the article, it was the author of the piece. But okay. I get the point you're making. Definitely the tone of the whole piece, including his part, was from that sceptical point of view. And I agree with a lot of what was written in there. Many paranormal experiences, maybe most, can be explained by some of that psychological and scientific topics that the article discussed, but not all.
No.
And that doesn't mean you can then make a huge leap to go, none of this exists. You know what I mean?
And the pareidolia thing, we covered it like maybe 2 years ago. We were talking about the Green Man and the Woodwows. And, this is an old English idea that the Green Man appears, his face, it's a living entity, but his face appears in trees and in bushes and stuff. And that at first glance does appear to be, perhaps pareidolia. But actually, when you dig into it, there's way more to it than that. And it had been dismissed for many years as being, isn't it fun to just imagine the shapes of faces in bushes and things like that. And that really isn't where the Woodwows and the Green Man come from. There is a much deeper and more paranormal tradition around it, but it is overtaken by these kind of modern dismissive ideas, which don't do us any favours at all.
Yeah, and I deliberately chose to cover that because of it does illustrate that almost destructive, sceptical point of view, and like I said, the points that are interesting and really worth exploring, almost you react to them and they get lost a little bit because you're affronted that it's like, let's have a bit more open mind. And it really got me looking at, can I find a less sceptical academic opinion or theories on the paranormal? So that's what I set out to do after reading that article.
Sure, but to be clear to any new listeners here, you're not because you're seeking confirmation bias.
No. Just
something which doesn't immediately shut down the argument.
Yeah, exactly. And let's start with the paper that I found published in Futurescape, the Journal of Ghost Science, which I didn't know was a thing, but apparently it's a thing.
Now that seems like something I'd want to subscribe to.
It was published in February.
Is this science that
year.
Ghosts do?
Yeah, exactly. In their white coats. Hey.
That's why they always appear like that. How do they pick up the test tubes?
They've got the poltergeists do that. The poltergeists are the lab assistants. They do the test tubes. The ghosts are more in a,
supervisory capacity.
Supervisory kind of role, academic role.
Right,
really.
they're writing the papers.
Yeah.
Obviously ghost written.
Poltergeists are lab technicians, basically.
Let's reserve this conversation for the pub.
Yeah. Well, the paper I came across is by Dr. Meena Sahni from the Kumaraguru College of Liberal Arts and Science. Good title, this one. Shadow Dimensions, Parallel Worlds and Paranormal Activity.
Okay, I'm in.
I'm going to read the abstract for the paper, which I thought was really good. Really, this is what drew me in. They say, the concept of parallel worlds or shadow dimensions has intrigued philosophers, scientists and mystics alike for centuries. Parallel universe theories, which suggest the existence of alternate realities beyond our own, have gained popularity in recent years through advances in quantum physics, cosmology and speculative fiction. Simultaneously, paranormal activity, a phenomenon that defies conventional scientific explanation, such as ghost sightings, poltergeist occurrences, and near-death experiences, have been observed across different cultures and epochs. I love epochs. It's a lovely word. This research paper explores the intersection of these two domains, examining how theories of parallel worlds might provide a framework for understanding certain types of paranormal activity. Drawing upon quantum mechanics, dimensional theories, and the accounts of paranormal experiences, the paper proposes that some paranormal phenomena may be linked to interactions with or bleed-throughs through parallel worlds. So you can see, like last week, I said, hey, I'm working on something that sounds very similar to your Skyfish episode.
Yeah, this is similar. Yeah. It's this concept of things aren't coming from outer space or from like a heavenly or hellish realm. They're coming from a different, equally real reality to ours.
Yeah. As a way of introduction, the paper explored the idea of parallel universes, parallel world theory, becoming prominent in the scientific exploration of quantum mechanics, and it asks a question as to whether this theory may have connections with paranormal activity, providing an alternative viewpoint to the traditional view that ghosts and paranormal activity are the spirits of the dead or connected purely with the divine or spiritual, which I thought is really interesting. So let's start with the quantum world and parallel universes. The idea of parallel universes, the author says, is deeply rooted in the realms of theoretical physics, particularly in the study of quantum mechanics and cosmology. Quantum mechanics, with its focus on the behaviour of particles at subatomic levels, has led to intriguing suggestions about the nature of reality itself. One prominent theory, the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, posits that every quantum event creates a branching of alternate realities. According to the many worlds interpretation, all possible outcomes of quantum interactions occur in separate, non-interfering worlds. These alternative universes, by definition, parallel and coexistent, each embodying a different version of reality based on different outcomes of quantum events. So I guess that's kind of classic Schrodinger's cat thing, isn't it? Every time something happens. Moreover, string theory, a framework used to explain the fundamental particles of the universe, suggests that there could be multiple compactified dimensions beyond the 3 spatial and 1 temporal dimension we perceive. I hadn't heard this bit before. According to string theory, the universe might have as many as 11 dimensions, some of which are hidden from direct observation.
Yeah, the trouble with that is it's those 11 dimensions fit into the string theory, if you see what I mean. It fits into the model. And it is unproven how far they go. And this is the great mystery of it all, is like, because when I was researching this, I did come across some other papers which they weren't sort of in the right direction for what I was covering, but they did speak of string theory and how it is quite deeply flawed in the fact that it fails to explain it fails to explain those other dimensions. It sort of says, well, they must be there. Now, that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with it. It's just it's a sort of a partial theory because of that. Now, that I know if you're a scientist listening, you'll probably be saying you're explaining that wrong, Ben. But that's just kind of what I picked up from it. Nevertheless, that is the truth, that it doesn't fully understand what those other dimensions are, and that is probably one of the reasons why we struggle with this interdimensional body thing. I mean, in sort of direct contrast to that, there is another book I was reading where the model that they were using to explain the multidimensional universe was they could even predict how far away you were from another version of yourself.
Right.
But again, it's so theoretical and there are so many assumptions.
Yeah.
It sort of slightly becomes a Doctor Who-ish type of thing rather than a sit down in a white coat-ish type of thing.
I agree. And I think, there's a bit here where I think the author acknowledges that in a way. They say the concept of these hidden dimensions implies that there could be parallel worlds or alternate realities that exist in close proximity to our own, potentially influencing the world we experience without our direct awareness. These ideas, while theoretical, present the possibility that alternate worlds could exist alongside our own, with interaction between these worlds being a latent or even unexplained part of our reality. In such alternate dimensions, if such alternate dimensions are real, the interaction between them could provide a framework for understanding phenomena that appears paranormal in nature.
Yeah.
I guess this is a theory we have discussed a number of times on the podcast, right? From ghost encounters right the way through to could the Loch Ness monster be an interdimensional being? You know? I mean, it's one of those things where one has to be careful about. So when we sort of talk about a unifying theory of paranormal phenomena, I think you and I both slip into sort of the most likely explanation becomes the simulated universe theory, because it does explain everything. One could equally slip into that, I think, with the multi-dimensional thing where you just say, well, things bleed through from other dimensions and then you don't have to explain the rest of it. Comes a catch-all.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas I think it's a useful tool to discuss the ideas. It's putting actual hard facts around it would be, that would be my favoured next step. But I'm sort of slightly contradicting myself what I said last week, which is the problem with this is then that if you only consider it with that Western empirical view, and I'm not dismissing, I think you do have to do that, but if you dismiss other elements such as sort of spirituality and the idea of consciousness, I'm not talking about examining deities and stuff, I'm talking about things which might not be as easy to explain through mere rational scientific explanation. If you dismiss those things, I think it becomes even more hard to explain this. When we did the episode on invisibility, I've had a couple of people say to me that wasn't a particularly strange idea to them, because if you sort of have psychic abilities or whatever, they understand that you can change the way that you appear to other people. And so I guess that, there's what I'm trying to say is that there is a way that belief also impacts upon these things, and it might have a material output on the way that these things are perceived.
Yeah. Well, I think some of the things you're talking about, the author Dr. Sani tries to tie together. In a section, I love this, the paper titled "The Intersection of Parallel Worlds and Paranormal Activity."
Okay, perfect.
So they
Bring that on.
They say the concept of parallel worlds or shadow dimensions offers a compelling explanation for certain types of paranormal activity. If multiple dimensions exist alongside our own, it is possible that the boundaries between these worlds are not completely impermeable. In this framework, paranormal events such as ghost sightings, apparitions, and poltergeist activity could be the result of bleed-through effect, where events or entities from one dimension briefly intersect or manifest in our own. These interactions could manifest as unexplained phenomena that seem supernatural in nature. One possible explanation for ghost sightings is the theory that they are not manifestations or spirits or souls, but the remnants or echoes from alternate realities. These ghosts might be people or events from parallel worlds whose actions or emotions reverberate into our own dimension for brief moments. Such intersections could occur when the dimensional barriers between reality thins. I thought that's almost like a thinning of the veil on Halloween in a way, allowing glimpses into other worlds that are otherwise inaccessible to the human eye. Also, time slips could fit into that, I guess. These could manifest as visual, auditory, or even tactile phenomena, which might explain the widespread belief in ghosts and spirits. Poltergeist activity involving the movement of objects and other disruptions in the environment could similarly be linked to influences of nearby parallel dimensions. It is conceivable that in some instances, physical objects may be affected by the energy or force operating in an adjacent dimension, causing them to move or behave in ways that appears inexplainable. The sudden and unpredictable nature of poltergeist activity, often accompanied by a feeling of chaotic energy, could be the result of such dimensional interference. I mean, I like the concept of all that. I was hoping for a little bit more science. It's more a thought piece.
I was just going to say, yeah, that's the problem. Is the word "could be"?
Yeah,
I think I appreciate what he's saying, and I think it's valuable to say it. But I think what I would want is kind of some kind of explanation of how that might be. So what took me not by surprise, but what really drew me into the book of last week, Augustus's work, was that he was attempting to actually build equations which might explain how the skyfish form. But I know it's very, very difficult to do that. Sort of as you say, like where do you start with a poltergeist bleeding through from another dimension? Conceptually, it makes sense. That's the problem. Conceptually, it does make sense. But then once you get into like, well, okay, perhaps this equation or this mathematical principle, this quantum mathematical principle maybe might explain it, you then are left with the thing which was where I was coming from before, which is kind of, well, what is the motivation? What is the reason? So if a poltergeist does bleed in from another dimension, why is it throwing my cups around in the bed in the kitchen? What is the motivation for that, and why would that be a thing? That's the thing that I struggle with.
Yeah, and I guess in that paper it doesn't explain those kind of movements which feel like communications. All it talked about was almost some energy disturbance from one dimension to another, which might knock an object over, rather than, like the classic poltergeist thing of stacking the chairs on the table, which seems to have an order or a communicatory type angle to it.
By the way, I think that is possibly the scariest thing that Of all the phenomena that we've ever discussed,
Yeah.
stacking chairs neatly on tables, I don't know why, I find that absolutely terrifying.
Although I bet the Cross Keys would like a poltergeist like that at the end of the night in the pub, just tacking up the tables. It'd be great.
There's a video that was doing the rounds about a year ago, and I initially thought it was fake, but many people have tried to debunk it. And I've seen an interview with the guy who filmed it. He is a real estate agent. I have to say that, not an estate agent, because it was in America. And he's filming one of those pieces to camera, as they do in the States, where he's selling the house. And he's just come out of the kitchen, and there's like a dining room set. And as he comes out of the kitchen, he hears this disturbance, turns around, and as you can imagine, all the chairs are stacked perfectly,
Right.
but also precariously.
Right.
And it happens within a blink of an eye, and he's terrified. And like, he was interviewed, and people are saying, "But you just cut." And he was like, "No, like, my job." Imagine me going back to the office and saying, "I just had a poltergeist in the house. It doesn't help me sell the house. It doesn't help my reputation." I was very convinced by that. And I think that is terrifying. That to me is terrifying.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to a more detailed paper by Jeffrey Mishlove, who's a psychologist and philosopher, and Brendan Egan. This is one of those classic academic paper titles. You ready for it? Archetypal Synchronistic Resonance, a New Theory of Paranormal Experience. Yeah.
I'm just breaking that down in my head. So archetypes. No, go on, hit me. What's this about then?
Well, this paper introduces a new theory. Although they've called it Archetypal Synchronistic Resonance in the title, they're calling their new theory Synchronistic Archetypal Resonance. So SAR rather than ARSA, which makes sense. Yeah. Now, it's created by the psychologist and philosopher Jeffrey Mishlove. So SAR explores experiences related to reincarnation, such as past life memories reported through therapy or spiritual practices. There's some incredible coincidences coming up in a minute, which we're going to talk about. The theory aims to find a fair way to study these experiences, taking them seriously without blindingly believing in supernatural explanations. SAR suggests that when people report experiencing past lives, it doesn't mean that their souls are moving to new bodies. Instead, it points to activation of universal archetypes, shared symbols and themes in human psychology among individuals from different types and backgrounds. There's a really weird background to how this paper came about, Ben. And it happened in the summer of 2005. One of the authors, Brendan, received a past life reading claiming that he had been a student of the Roman philosopher Seneca, and that Seneca's current incarnation was the other author of this paper, Jeffrey Mishlove.
Okay, wow.
Wow, right? Now, Brendan was sceptical of this claim, but he reached out to Jeffrey Mishlove, who's this psychologist, and it led to a series of significant and meaningful coincidences between them. Some of them I think are not as significant as the paper claims, but there is one that is just a bit mind-blowing. Before we get into that, let's delve into the concept they describe as SAR, or this archetypal synchronistic resonance. So the archetypal part refers to something proposed by psychologist Carl Jung, as we know had a deep interest in the paranormal. He proposed that there are deep-rooted universal themes in our psyche, that basically they're almost pre-programmed in us, and in certain triggers occur, we almost get in contact with them. Which is where the synchronistic part of this comes in. Jung defines synchronicity as meaningful coincidences where events appear related without a casual connection. So this suggests a deeper connection between our inner experience and the outside world or the universe itself, right? Now, the resonance part of this concept relates to feeling of connection or similarities with someone from the past. So this is the regressive bit. SAR is S, synchronicity, events that appear connected when they maybe should not be. A is the archetypal, that our psyche is connected, I guess, with the wider universe. And resonance is about feeling connected with someone from the past. I did a good job of shortening that.
That was pretty
today.
good. That was pretty good. I'm digesting. I wish I had a notepad, but yes, I'm with you.
Yeah. We're doing it wrong if you need a notepad. I think. Now, the authors focus on how people report past life experiences, even if they remain sceptical of the literal truth of these claims. They believe such experience reveal valuable insight into our psychology. This is where their personal experience comes into it, and it's just so weird. Jeffrey Mishlove, who is the psychologist, he had a hypnotic session in the 1980s where he encountered a figure who identified as the Roman philosopher Seneca and encouraged him to study everything he could about Seneca's life.
Right.
Years later, Brendan Engen received a past life reading, claiming that he was Seneca's student and telling him to contact Mishlove, who was the reincarnation of Seneca.
Right.
Mishlove received the first email from Engen. This is a weird coincidence. So this is, you think about it, so we've got Mishlove 1980, yeah? You've got Engen in 2005 being told to get in contact with him, so he does. Mishlove received the first email from Engen the day before Mishlove was due to go on holiday to visit the birthplace of the Roman philosopher Seneca.
Oh, okay, that's weird.
You think that's weird. This is where it gets really bizarre. A couple of days later, Engen was in a second-hand bookstore and he purchased a book titled The Looking Glass God. When he took the book home, he opened it and found it had previously been owned by Mishlove, who'd written his name in it.
Oh, my word.
How weird is that?
Wow, okay.
So the relationship between them grew and they basically came together with this concept of SAR and they decided to jointly write this paper. So the paper is mainly about this concept they've got, but the reason it came together is just so bizarre.
That is a real, you know, it's when you say the universe is trying to tell me something, that really is...
Yeah.
I mean, that is on the verge of paranormal, that is.
Because of those events, they thought there was more to play than just pure coincidence.
Yeah.
So they don't kind of go full on that this is a connection with the paranormal as we traditionally know it, or say they believe in past life regressions or that they are the reincarnation of these people. But both of them kind of said they felt it was more than just coincidence, because both men, through some kind of regression, were drawn or guided to explore the life of this one Roman philosopher, Seneca.
Yeah.
So you might say they were compelled to study his life. The more they learned about the philosopher's life, the more instances of déjà vu and a coincidence occurred for them both and together. They both felt a deep connection with this Roman philosopher and each other, even though they'd never met. It felt, I think they described it more or less, I read it as, it was almost like this long dead philosopher was acting like a mentor to them both. And it made them feel there was a bigger connection in the universe, which is why they came up with this, you know, this idea of this SAR thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So they don't come right out and say they've tapped into something more than coincidence, but suggest keeping an open mind, which again, if we compare it to the very first article, it's like, great, have an open mind. They recognise that some experiences labelled as synchronistic could be attributed to cognitive bias, you know, the tendency to see patterns or connections in random data to make your conclusion come together. They argue that while it's essential to be cautious about attributing meaning to coincidences, dismissing all synchronistic experiences as mere error overlooks their potential significance. They advocate for a balanced approach to understanding paranormal experiences, appreciating their depth without falling into dogmatic beliefs. They believe that exploring these experiences can enrich our understanding of the human psyche and our connection to one another across time and the universe. I just thought, compared to that first article, they have lots of reasons to go, there is something weird going on here. And rather than, writing a sensational book about the whole thing, they let's try and think of what could be going on here. Is there some connection with you? And again, they don't particularly go into the science of how that might work. There is some quantum mechanics in there. There is parallel universes and, the idea of time not being linear. But I just love the fact that given those experiences and finding that book for the guy that you've been told to get in contact with.
Yeah.
And they just ran with it. And rather than cashing in, they said, well, let's think of a theory around it. I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So I've heard of Seneca. Do you know from your research what ideas he came up with?
I don't, to be honest. I didn't look into it. I know he's a Roman philosopher. Yeah, do you know any of his?
No, I don't. No. The only thing I know about him was that he was one of the more kind of sensible and thoughtful kind of philosophers,
right,
and had a lot of really interesting ideas. Sort of when you contrast it to like Pliny the Elder,
right,
who comes up with just bonkers stuff the entire time.
Yeah.
No, that's really interesting. But I've been in. You know how fascinated I am with reincarnation as well, and there's this idea. I mean, it's a well trodden knowledge in the world that we work in and speak in, where there's this idea that as you go through reincarnation, you tend to reincarnate with people who you've incarnated with before, even if you change roles.
Right.
But you also might start paying off karmic debt or changing karmic debt. And you just reminded me, I was reading about a story about a guy who he had it was related. He had an eating disorder. He just couldn't eat. He had like Crohn's disease, I believe.
Right.
And he was getting treatment for this. And then in a past life regression that he had, that was nothing to do with his illness, he discovered that in 3 identifiable past lives, he was a glutton. He was just an enormous man. No, there was no like karmic debt there to carry, really. He wasn't really doing anything wrong. He just loved to eat. He was just a very big man in 3 incarnations. And in this incarnation, he couldn't eat. And it was like the universe was saying, you need to learn not to eat so much, because that'll be your downfall. That'll be the thing that kills you. And it's just kind of, that only sort of fits into what you were saying there in a kind of obtuse way. But I think it's interesting that even in that sort of reincarnation way, it's not necessarily to be sneezed at. There's loads of cool ideas around that.
Can you imagine, though, just that thing about the book? You've just emailed this guy going, I know this sounds a bit weird, but I had a past life regression and they told me to get in contact with you about this Roman philosopher. And then basically turning up a bookshop, not buying a book on that subject, another book, and turning out it's the guy you just emailed.
It's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, and it was hundreds of miles away from, they didn't live near each other.
Yeah.
So the book shouldn't have been there, you know what I mean? I know you can bring down the odds of it, but incredible.
Yeah.
And I know I probably didn't explain their theory of SAR particularly well, but it was a bit hard to wade through. But I think it's more the angle of what they were trying to do that impressed me.
Yeah. And the archetypes are, they are things that translate around civilizations, gods and deities and all that sort of thing. They're all the archetypes. Yeah. No, that was great. That was very interesting. I stopped being angry.
Yes, well, I thought that would cheat.
I was about to literally just throw the table over and.
But to be honest, I'm glad you've been through that emotional journey, because that's what it was like for me
Yeah.
researching it. That one made me so angry at the start, and it was like, I want to find something that's not going to make me angry. And then when I came across that last paper, it was like, wow, okay, that's not made me angry at all. Quite the opposite.
Well, I think a lot of people probably have encountered within either friend groups or at work, maybe, almost, you don't want to talk about the idea of like ghosts or anything otherworldly because you're worried that people will poo-poo it because that is just the nature of it. And that is, we've always said that. I mean, the giggle factor is a term that was coined by Timothy Good when he referred to the reason why people don't examine the UFO phenomena as seriously as they probably should. Now, he was talking back in the 70s and 80s about that, so I think that might have changed a little bit. But I think that it is something that pervades today and should be fought back on, because we will never get to the bottom. How often do we end an episode saying we'll never get to the bottom of it unless we actually start talking about these things openly and seriously?
Yeah, definitely. Well, talking of seriously, we're going to be discussing this a little bit more on Ben and Peter's Extra Scoop, a Patreon exclusive episode. So if you're a Patreon or you want to become one, come and join us there now for that. Patreon.com/TQM pod. Also, there'll be a link in the show notes. We've just launched our merchandise store, so we've got lots of cool t-shirts and stuff if you fancy taking a look and buying something that you can wear with pride this summer. Go and check that out. The link will be in the show notes.
You can also get a jigsaw with our faces on.
Yeah, who would not want that?
There's a special prize for anyone who buys that.
Yeah, really. Alrighty, well, we'll see you next time on the Quantum Mechanics.
All right, take care. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Are you the quantum mechanics?